Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the CoinRock Show. We have part two, this time with Chris, who is back. We had so much to cover on the first episode we did a few weeks ago, and we said, there's too much to cover in one episode, so let's do another one. And this is it, part two. Welcome, Chris. And yeah, this is it's been a few intense past few weeks, so happy to have you back. How's things on your end?
They are never boring, that is for sure. It's been
Yeah.
it's been a it's definitely been a couple of very interesting weeks for everybody, regardless of where they sit in the investment landscape or the market. So
Yeah.
happy to dive in and make sense of it all or have a
Yep.
conversation around it.
Yeah, really curious actually. Let's talk about the economy because everyone, it's all over the news. Every day new headlines from the US government and of course other countries reacting to it. What's your take on what's been happening over the last few weeks?
I've written as it's unfolded, I've written several things and the shameless plug, but I think it'll be valuable just because we'll touch on them. And I've written a lot about this on wealthmatterstome.com, which is my Substack.
Yep.
And I've kind of evolved with it as it kind of shapes up. I hesitate to give a blanket opinion. I think right now the obvious thing is in the short run, there's a lot of uncertainty still, and
Yep.
I think that's going to be the case for a little bit longer. Maybe not as long as people think, but I do think it's going to last a little bit longer than other people think. And it's one of the posts that I put out there talked about how there's like the thing that looks good on paper and the strategy that you can go execute, and then there's other players on the field that start to do what they do, and then
Yep.
that impacts everything, right? And so we're seeing that right now with China. We're seeing that with this escalation. One of the posts that I encourage people to look at that I wrote about was called "The Guns of April." For those who
Mm.
don't know what that's a play on words of, there's a book written back in the early 1900s called "The Guns of August." And one of my favorite movies to watch is called 13 Days. If you haven't seen it, it came out maybe 15, 20 years ago. It's got Kevin Costner and other actors in it, but it's all about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Okay. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and so in that, the guy who plays JFK, who was the president at the time, there's this scene in there where he talks about reading a book, The Guns of August. So that's what originally put that book on my radar, was watching that
Yep.
movie. But what the author writes about in that book is how these things escalate into kind of a place where it's like nobody wants to back down. And
Mm.
so specifically written during World War One, where you got to this place where we had this kind of crazy escalation and the trench warfare and all that stuff. And um, I think that's what the Guns of April was about, was just talking about when you go with tariffs in one direction, right? What does the other side do?
Yep.
And ultimately it's this game of chicken. And again, there's the people that want to say the world as it should be. There's the people that want to see the world as they want it to be or as they think
Yep.
it should be. And the reality is then, smart investors and smart business people just try and look at what it actually is.
Yep. Yep.
And and that means you have to kind of put those other notions aside of how it should be, how it could be, how we'd like it to be, and you have to go, well, how actually is it, right? It's no different than if you go outside and you want it to be sunny, but it's, a hurricane, like, well, then you're not going to do the things that you would do in sun when there's a
Yep.
hurricane, right? So
Yep.
like and I want to say that because I don't want to lose any of the audience thinking that I believe it's a certain way or it's not because of my own opinion or some political agenda or anything. I don't have one. And yet I think there's strategies that are being deployed right now that in some ways I think we could find a lot of things that were necessary or right about. I also think we could find some things that we could talk about that maybe we're overplaying or maybe we're executing not as well as we'd like, or that we're not listening to the signals that are happening in real time. And then there's just the obvious stuff that is hyper politicized in all fronts, and not just in our country, but in the global economy. I mean, I don't think the Fed right now is acting apolitical. I think in some ways they are acting political. Now, I could be wrong, but
Yep.
the other day with with Powell's comments. I mean, he reinforced that, oh, we're independent and, okay, but there was other narrative in there that was poking at some of the things that you could tell maybe he disagrees with, therefore the
Yep.
Fed is going to disagree with. And I think these are the dynamics that investors are trying to read through, allocators are trying to read through, acquirers like us are trying to read through. The post yesterday that I put out was finding peace of mind and prosperity during troubling times, and it's
Yep.
really about the mental model, which I'm happy to kind of talk about more in length today too as we weave through this. The mental model that I have of how I see this unfolding is based, over an accumulation of different thought leaders and frameworks over the last 20 years, and it's playing out, in my opinion, it's playing out pretty much as predicted, and so where we end up on the other side of this complexity is, I think, a really good place. A lot of things that are happening right now, quite frankly, are, in my opinion, overdue.
Yep.
We could argue whether or not we should have forced them to happen or whether we should have let them happen. But at the end of the day, the things that we're seeing that were unsustainable have been unsustainable for a long time. And I
What
think,
specifically? And like, for example, what specifically?
well, certainly the debt load, right? I
Yeah.
mean, everybody from Dalio to, I mean, you don't have to find too many different people from different, maybe political
Yeah.
spectrums that don't think we have a debt problem. I mean, I think that's obvious. Now, the reality is no matter how much effectiveness we can do with Doge, and I'm a supporter of trying to find as many wasteful and fraudulent or
Yep.
issues on that side as we can. Again,
Yep.
not trying to trigger anybody with the political, but the reality is we have got to cut
That
spending.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And yet the forcing function says that spending in the near term has to explode, right? So
Yeah.
there's this weird dichotomy of kind of competing ideas and realities, right? Which is we have to curb spending because ultimately we have to keep spending.
Yep.
So it's not a matter of whether the aggregate number, slows down. It's whether we can close the deficit gap enough
Yep.
so that
Yep.
where we actually have to spend, we can, because right now that's unsustainable. So I think as we look at those kind of things, there's like this inevitability to them. But just like everything else, it's kind of like where is the money being allocated and into what for the sake of productivity growth? Because if we can't drive productivity growth, regardless of how we do it,
Yep.
then the entire game's over. And so we could debate on what we're spending on or this or that, but at the end of the day, what we can't debate on is we have to find productivity growth. Technology is going to enable more productivity, but it's also going to, in the short run, create a massive reskilling, necessity, and which means job loss.
Yep.
Supply shocks like we're seeing right now are creating same thing. Supply shock, like job loss, stagflation. So we're really looking at a market of stagflation for probably the next little bit of time. And the only way out of that is to solve the supply shock issue, which means
Yep.
geopolitical tensions, come to a head and we get some level of recognition of a new deal, right? China said, if you'll respect us, we'll do a deal. We'll see.
Yep.
We'll see if we can respect them. I mean, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like respect has got to be mutual.
Yep.
So anyway, that's a lot. Let's go down into whatever questions you think the audience may
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about like your perspective too. See what we can come
Yeah.
up with.
It's funny, the debt issue has been talked about for years now. It's almost like the market was looking for something or for a time to actually talk about this publicly, because all if you talk to any financier, anyone on the hedge fund side, which I have a lot of friends who either are PMs or run their own hedge funds. I mean, I remember talking about this walking in London in Hyde Park before COVID, the unsustainable rate of debt, and then COVID, of course, the printing. So nothing new, right? It's been more, I think it's been, what's almost surprising to me is that you have more mainstream and non-financial people talking about, like, the average Joe talking about the debt, which 5 years ago, no one even knew that the US was in debt. I mean, you would have to talk to someone who knows, at least interested in finance. Now the mainstream is covering it. The average Joe is aware of it, and I think Doge is doing something amazing. The issue is, and we had Mark Connors on the show a few days ago. He's like a 35-year-old, like 35-year veteran. Macro was at Salomon Brothers, and he said the issue is can they solve it quick enough? That's the issue. It's like, can we do both at the same time? Can you reduce deficit while keeping, the spending going? Because consumers have to spend, businesses have to grow. That's the issue. And so it's very difficult to navigate both things at the same time. And of course, I agree with you, about the fact that the Fed is political. I think it's always been political, more so now because Trump is so polarizing. And I think that, I wrote an article about this saying that, either Trump or Powell will blink first. Simple as that. And so historically, Trump being, I've read most of Trump's books. I remember reading The Art of the Deal when I was a teenager. And he thrives under pressure. The man knows pressure better than anyone. I think that most people on earth would have cracked at some point after everything he's had to go through. Not only forget about his business career, right? Being in debt, owing billions of dollars to the banks in the 90s and surviving. And now after this, of course, his campaign and everything that happened on the campaign trail. So, he's very comfortable under pressure. Now, how comfortable is Powell and the Fed under pressure? And I think that's the main thing. My money is on Trump being able to uh, maneuver well under pressure, just because he's thrived under pressure for decades. So I agree with you that the Fed is political. The issue is, I think one thing that Washington and I think the Trump administration might be underestimating is, other countries also have some leverage, right? This is not like the US is, of course, a superpower, but it's not the US versus China of the 2000s. Like China has gained a lot over the last 20 years. I don't know if of course they have a lot of tools to deal with China and Russia, like they say the three main powers, China being the big one. Are they underestimating China? China's very smart too. So that's what's interesting to me is
I
how's the
think,
other
you
side
know,
coming back with?
I'm gonna caveat this again by saying I'm not a fanboy, and I
Yep,
don't want anything that I say to sound like a fanboy. I'm gonna do my best as someone who has different opinions than me, but who I respect. And Scaramucci,
yep,
he and I don't see the current thing in a lot of ways the same way. But one thing I appreciate about Anthony is he made a comment on Twitter several weeks back that said, it's important to call balls and strikes. And
yep,
so, why I think that's a really smart comment is I'm going to do my best to call the balls and strikes as I see them. But I
yep,
don't want this to be something that makes it sound like I'm, all MAGA, all this, all that, because
yep,
the reality is I'm not. I'm what I consider to be fiercely independent. I
yep,
like to try and stay as pragmatic and practical as possible. But there's a lot to like about the things that scare people right now.
yep,
And there's a lot of things that I think if we can get outside of the noise level and think for a minute that we might give a little bit more rope before we judge whether or not it's shooting from the hip or whether there's a bigger design. I actually am of the opinion, and it could change. There's some things in play right now that are kind of shifting me, maybe closer to, well, I'm not sure if I'm right. So I'll caveat with that. But right now,
yep,
if I was to give a scorecard right now, I'd say that there's something different this time about this administration, and I'm not just talking about the man at the top of it.
yep.
The first time around, it was obvious that there was not a lot of preparation or
I
experience,
agree with you.
what have you. I think everyone can
Completely
look
agree.
back and say
Yep,
that was obvious. I think this time there was a tremendous amount of prep
yep,
prior to even the decision, meaning leading all the way up until the election day.
yep,
There was a lot of preparation. There was a lot of recruitment of really, really smart and accomplished people.
yep,
And from different walks of life. You have a
yep,
former Soros guy in Besant, macro guy
yep,
running Treasury.
yep,
That's really happened for a long, long time, right? That
yep,
usually it's another central banker running Treasury. So
yep,
you have Lutnick. Again,
Yep.
regardless of what people think, the reality is this Lutnick is extremely accomplished
Accomplished. Yes,
in
yes. Real
moral
business guy. He
practice.
actually built a real business.
So
Yep.
you have someone who I do respect, and again,
Yep.
maybe it'll get me in trouble with people, but I don't care because I've met him and I've spent significant time with him. You have Bobby Kennedy in Health and Human Services.
Yep.
You have a lot of really smart. I mean, obviously you have Elon and the stuff that's happened with Tesla and all this stuff is just the toxic nature of our society and
Yep.
our willingness
Yep.
to accept violence as an answer for people we disagree with. And again, to eradicate all those things, I think is just that we're done for society from, the Starlink to SpaceX to Tesla to, it's just silly to me. And
Yep.
I'm not saying Elon by any means is a perfect human or doesn't have whatever agenda. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that was a ridiculous outcome, in my opinion. It's something that
Yep.
we should not continue to support in the way of how we treat people that we, have a different opinion with or that we think are doing something that we don't agree with. I just think there's a better way to do it. So all that being said, you have some very smart people, and so far, forget what the internal conversations look like. So far, they have shown a tremendous amount of alignment.
Yep.
Now, people that hate Trump and that are never going to change their opinion about that will tell you that they're all underneath some kind of ether or delusion, or the con man is at his very best, or whatever they're going to say. Okay,
Yep.
these are smart people. These are accomplished people. At some point, they are going to splinter, or they are
Yep.
going to hold together for real. And
Yep.
the amount of pressure that's been on that administration in this first 90 days, both with all of the productive things that they've done, the massive
Yep.
amount of things they've initiated, and that they're now having to, gut through because it's easy to initiate them. It's harder to see them through, right?
Yep.
What I'm noticing is right or wrong. What I'm noticing is there is a pretty solid alignment from Rubio down. I mean, you take the division.
Yep.
There is an alignment around the amount of transparency, the amount of
Yep.
what they're going to show that they're doing, whether you like it or not. They're going to talk about
Yep.
it. They're going to open up
It's
the
never been done before. Even tweeting
never been.
about how much money they're saving has never been done before. Yeah.
Well, and even with the cabinet meetings and whatever, and you can say,
Yep.
oh, it's staged, it's reality TV. Okay, but guess what? That's the world we've lived in for the last 20 years, and
Yeah.
we've never had the opportunity to actually have our political leaders held to that account on a day-to-day basis. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you can call it theater, you can call it staging, you can call it whatever you want. The reality is we went 4 years with zero clarity into what the
Yeah.
hell was going
Yeah.
on. Zero.
Yeah.
And now we're getting over-indexed on clarity as to what they're thinking, and we
Yeah.
can agree with it, disagree with it, we can debate it, we can holler about it, we can fearmonger about it, but
Yeah.
at least we have it. And
Yeah.
I think the fact that almost all those moves are being telegraphed, even no matter what, and then you're
Hmm.
getting a chance to read the body language in real time of the rest of the team, you'd be hard pressed to say that there isn't some level of alignment, and that alignment kind of said, hey guys, here's the game plan. When and if we get in, here's the game plan. And here's what I'm going
Yep.
to expect everyone to do. And here's what we're going to. There was a plan going into this. This is not an erratic thing. Now, we could disagree with the plan. That's fair.
Yep.
We could think the strategy is off or too risky. That's fair.
Sure.
But I think it'd be very hard pressed to say that there isn't a plan.
Yep.
Because if you're watching this from afar, you realize they had a game plan. They started to execute it. They are in the middle of, call it the second quarter,
Yep.
truly. They're in the beginning of the second quarter of a 4-quarter game. Now, let's go to China. China plays 100-year games.
Yep.
So, as much as we don't want China to dictate the state of the world, and this is not against Chinese people, this is against the fact that the CCP is a communist organization, right? That,
Yep.
that is not transparent and is a dictatorship. All the things that we say we fear happening here. Well, what's the advantage of that? Well, the advantage of that is they can bury their unemployment. They can bury their bad stuff. They can lock people down. They can do a bunch of things
Yep.
to buy themselves the time to stay in the fight that they're not really equipped to win. And they are not equipped to win it, regardless of how big they are, regardless of how the reality is they are not equipped to rewrite the source code of the global economy. And the source code of the global economy is the US dollar reserve. And it is
That is true.
that network,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
network
Yep.
affects that. And if you haven't followed Brent Johnson at San Diego Capital or whatever and heard his milkshake theory and follow his readings and his updates, you have to do it. I mean,
Yep.
I wrote a post on this source code concept the other day about, the dollar won't die easily or slowly. And it was kind of trying to bring that to light in a layman's term way. But the reality is think of it like source code. It runs the global economy, and it is a
Yep.
totally different global economy today than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And although China is a big factor in it, especially when it
Yep.
comes to supplying that global economy, all those things are true. But this notion that somehow BRICS or Bitcoin, which I love, or any of these other things is going to replace the dollar hegemony is asinine. It's not going to
Yep.
happen. And if it does happen, it ain't going to happen in 10 weeks, let alone 10. It might take 10 to 20 years.
Yep.
So could it happen? Absolutely. Is it happening? Possibly. But we're talking about a 10 to 20 year run. So again, back to Trump. He's not going to back down.
Yep. I agree.
Anyone who's ever tried to not kick the can down the road, anyone, and who was even remotely successful
Yep.
in our 200 some odd year history has been shot.
Yep.
And they tried to shoot him. Now, whoever they are, the reality
Yep.
is they tried to shoot him. And so the way I look at it, right or wrong, is nothing to lose, everything to gain, in the sense of he's been shot at.
Yep.
He's been, regardless of what our opinions are, everything that could have happened to someone to try and take them out has happened to this man.
Yep.
And now he's got a bunch of smart people
And
that
that's just what
also
we know. We only know those 1, 2 attempts. Is God knows
and,
how
and,
many
and
that we
also
don't
the
know.
legal stuff and the legal, and again,
Yeah.
some of it legitimate, some of it probably lawfare.
Yep.
Again, not trying to
I agree with you. Yeah.
use people in the conversation because everyone can have their opinion about it. I'm trying to
Yep.
just say what is you have someone who has faced every possible attack that no one
Yep.
listening to this, including me, would go through more than one or two of before they go, yep, you know what, I'm good. I'm gonna go sit on a beach, or I'm gonna go, I'm gonna bet you guys
Yep.
figure this out, right? Like we wouldn't keep going. This is not just like I think, Elon in his own right innovates from a place where he's just trying to probably get home to whatever planet he's from, and Mars is a gas stop. Like
Yep.
like he's an alien, right? He's not a
Yep.
he's not a normal human. And I think in many ways Trump's not a normal human. Now we could say Xi's not either. And we could say Putin's not. And that's probably true. There's aspects of that. But at the end of the day, when you look at who who has the source code to win,
Yep.
it's the US. That's the source code. That's what the entire world runs on, and it ain't going to change in 10 minutes, whether we throw a fit or not. You don't
Yep.
have to like it. You don't have to think it's fair. You're not rewriting. It's like Windows. Like you could hate
Yep.
it, want an Apple, but 20 years ago, guess what? Windows won
Yep.
because it was everywhere. It was the network effects. So you're not going to um, rewrite that source code in a meaningful way to fix this some other way. And then you have the probably most will-powered, battle-tested, call it narcissism, call it whatever you want, person who has to blink, knowing, and this person is not an idiot. He knows he's sitting on the source code of the world.
Yep.
And he's never had that. He's always been a
Yep.
salesman. That's not new. He's always been a negotiator. That's not new. He's always made chicken shit sound like chicken soup. That's not new. But
Yep.
what's new is he's actually sitting on top of the ultimate source code that runs the largest economy in the world that everyone else is dependent on, and he's not going to back down.
Yep.
So, again, love it or not, if you're going to place a wager on who's going to win that
Yep.
argument, now the question becomes, and this is the question that I think is really fair and worth asking, what are the impacts in society?
Yep.
This is what I was writing about in the Guns of April. Just because that's the case does not mean that's healthy, does not
Yep.
mean that's good.
I agree.
Does not mean that's not damaging. All of those things are also true
Yep.
because when you have someone who knows that, um, no matter how much, they may be doing it for the greater good, at the end of the day, there are going to be losses, there are going to be impacts, and there are going to
Yep.
be sacrifices on all sides made. And the question becomes, okay, so which body of humanity is likely to force you to change your direction, right? And in the US, benefit or curse, blessing or curse, and I think it's a blessing more than a curse, but it is a factor in this. We have 2 and 4 year cycles.
Yep.
Now, I think personally, and I could be wrong, I think personally that this time it's really about legacy. I think this time it's about how history will look back 50 years from
Yep.
now, not how people will look at this in 24 months at the midterms. I actually think the pawn or the chess piece that's being willing to sacrifice is the 2028. And I think the 2026 is. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that the Republicans are happy about that as a party. I'm saying that I think that this administration has made a decision that we're going to go for broke.
Yep.
Because if we don't do it, they think the consequence of not doing it
Yeah.
is worse. And for what that's worth, I kind of I'm I'm 50-50 on that, meaning we're never going to get this chance again. So can we survive through whatever those consequences are, knowing that we fixed something that had to be fixed enough to where when it gets back into some kind of restart,
Yep.
maybe it lasts another 100 years for the grandkids, and we can normalize out. Is that worth it? I don't know exactly how I feel about it yet, but I don't feel bad about it yet. I don't think it's all negative. I think it's actually maybe the one and only time we could do it because we have
Yep.
the timing, the leadership, and the willpower to make those hard calls. It doesn't mean I don't worry. Just means I think that if we're ever going to fix it, this is probably the only chance.
Yep. What are the things that worry you?
Um, the things that I think worry a lot of people, right? I
Yep.
mean, humanity is, like the biggest problem is, human beings. This is not something that we talk about or think about. There's only a handful of people that can run the world because there's
Yep.
most of us don't have that kind of ambition, that kind of whatever you want to call it, narcissism, sociopath, like whatever it is, right? There's a different
Yep.
kind of person that runs the world and it sits on top of the decisions that impact the other 8 billion, right? And
Yep.
when I say one, the different kind of people, we're talking about hundreds of maybe 1,000 people run the planet and 8 billion of us live on it. And we all have families and we all love our families. And, whatever we think about our retirement or our money or our wealth or our ambition, right, usually fits inside of that construct. And
Yep.
and so again, right or wrong isn't the question. What is there are a group of people, we can call them elites, we can call them, anti-establishment, we can call them whatever we want.
Yep.
There are a group of people that feel like they have been put here to make the world that the rest of us live in.
Yep.
And then all of us stack up somewhere in that hierarchy based on our entrepreneurialism, our ambition, our willingness to take pain, our willingness to not be liked by everybody, whatever. And then the majority, 90 some odd percent, right, just basically kind of
Yep.
get drug around. And so 70% of the planet doesn't even know this conversation's happening right now, nor do they
Yep.
care to be part of it, right? But they still have families, they still make decisions. They all have a supercomputer in the palm of their hand. They're
Yep.
all voting, they're all doing things. So they can all have an impact. And they're not usually doing that with knowledge, right?
Yep.
They're
Yep. I
doing
agree.
that with Pavlovian reactionary responses that the
Yep.
algorithms are compounding at record rates, and AI is only going to exponentially increase. So what worries me is the fact that although I see bright lights, which I do, I think you're right. I see younger generation for the last 15, 20 years as crypto and Bitcoin have penetrated the consciousness,
Yep.
more people today than when I started out, in 1999, and I read Creature from Jekyll Island for the first time, and I was like, what in the world? And I understood how the Federal Reserve was created, how it worked, and whatever. I mean, no one was talking about fiat. No one knew what that
Yep.
meant. No one knew what the Mandrake mechanism or fractional reserve banking was, or no one knew any of that stuff, including people with money.
Yep.
Now you have a whole generation of kids that, like, because of YouTube, because of whatever, not only know about it, but even talk about it, teach about it.
Yep.
And regardless of whether they have the pattern recognition of what that looks like when it starts to break, like
Yep.
now, because they
Yep.
grew up in a world of free money for the last 15, 20 years as a young adult, they still have at least the architecture. They may
Yep.
not
Yep.
see how that architecture deals with stress and storms and things like that. They may not have lived through that yet because they're 35 or 30,
Yep.
but they know about it. And I think
Yep.
those are good things. I think the consciousness is raising in a big way there. The downside of that
Yep.
is we also algorithmically are all guilty, but at least some of us that are over 45 remember a world that was analog enough where we realize that the phone is manipulating us, the algos are
Yep.
manipulating us, the feed's not real, that reality is shape-shifting now at a one-to-one basis, 8 billion strong, right? And
Yep.
that our opinion, like there is no fact. Like what is fact, right? So and then you layer in, like again, I wrote about this in the last post on the mental model. You layer in Rebecca Costa's stuff, the Watchman's Rattle, about the super memes that show up in society when complexity outpaces our ability to deal with the problems we create, right? We invent
Yep.
complexity in nanoseconds or picoseconds, and we evolve over millions of years as a mental
Yep.
cognitive organism. And so we have this biological constraint as humans to deal with the problems that we manufacture. We have the generational stuff that Howe and Strauss wrote about in Fourth Turning, which again is another book that kind of has reemerged now as like a main
Yep.
thing that people are talking about. But when I read it in '09, no one even knew what it was, and it was written in 1997. But now, it's been
I think
republished.
no,
Like you
I
have
agree.
good stuff.
I think COVID was also a almost like a you talk about old books or old works. I think COVID was also almost like a gave another like a new beginning to some of the old books and more like interest in social, even like 1984, right? A book that has been around for decades but lost interest, and now during COVID, since COVID, more people talk about just like the fabric of society and leadership. So there's a lot of and history tends to repeat itself. So if you can read the old books, you generally come up with a better understanding than most people do without reading anything.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. And I think again, COVID gave us other signals or proof points
Yeah,
that network effects, some of these new things, right? So what didn't exist before in the way that it does today were these network effects, right?
yeah,
And COVID gave us like blips, like on the radar that said, something might be different, right? Something
yeah,
might be different layered into what's not going to be different, right? So what's not going to be different is how humans react every 80 to 100 years because we're in these cycles of, as Neil Howe and Strauss, right, talked about, we're in the fourth turning, we're in the crisis, and we're probably 3 to 4 or 5 years away from the kind of pinnacle before we go into the high, assuming we
yeah,
don't, blow ourselves up. And so that's not going to change. That they've been studying and mapping that for 1,500 years, and it's kind of pretty predictable. So you can kind of draw some certainty around, oh, okay, the next 3 to 4 years, it could get a little bit worse. But
yeah,
then historically, what happens is we get to this kind of new consensus on what are the systems, institutions, where is trust going to be
yeah,
found again, and then that builds the infrastructure for how the global world and society and social contracts work for the next 100 years. But they only work really for the first 25 to 50 before they start to decay. It just takes them 50 more years to decay to where we are today. So again, that's kind of the fourth turning. But you look at network effects in books like Balaji's, with the network state, and you
yeah,
go, well, where can I see that playing out in real time? Oh, well, GameStop, because that made no sense and that should have never
yeah,
been possible. That was a COVID blip that said, wait a minute, these crowds, these communities of common interests that are
yeah,
made up of a bunch of people that never mattered before in the
yeah,
economic equation just toppled over smart money and hedge funds that know and have all the advantages. But this crowd now matters. And so similarly, populism as it rises in different
yeah.
markets, you see these populist elections happening, not just here, but obviously El Salvador and Argentina and all these other places. And so
In
there's
Europe too. Yeah,
Europe.
many every year
So
now.
you
Yeah,
you know you and then you wonder, well, then what could happen to Xi? Well,
yeah,
I mean, I don't think you have to wonder too long, right? I mean,
yeah,
his president for life mandate doesn't mean there isn't another, Tiananmen or some kind of thing there right
yeah,
now. That'll come at some kind of major, and I think that's the lever that we're putting on there right now. I mean, I read
yeah,
today that 20 million people last week got laid off from jobs under the age of 35 in Chinese factories last week,
yeah,
20 million.
yeah,
Right now, like that happens more and more.
yeah.
At some point, that
It's
becomes the
pressure.
thing that topples the
Yeah,
CCP,
yeah,
and that has happened historically in the past. And the
yeah,
CCP has been the longest running regime ruling over that. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. What I'm saying is those forces are real too,
yeah,
and capital flight is real, and locking all those
yeah,
things down only isolates you further. And so, as much as we know that the world runs on China's supply, the reality is China can't live without the world. And so isolating them and having 75, potential trade partners and deals,
yeah, yeah. I saw
a
that
lot of things
headline.
that
Yeah,
could go wrong. There's a lot of
yeah,
things that could still go wrong. There's a lot of backdoor deals. You know, there's a lot of double bets that could be happening that
yeah,
that other people do, and who knows how it's going to shake out. But at the end of the day, most people are conscious that the source code that runs the global economy is the Federal Reserve and the US dollar hegemony, and the fact that the majority of settlements happen in dollars. The majority of
Yep.
swaps are needed because the majority of debt is denominated in dollars. And if you blow that whole thing up, you blow everybody up.
Yep.
And so at some point, somebody's going to cave, and one much gathers more, and that's the bet.
Yep.
And again, you add in some of these other pieces, the Genius Act. Let's create a real regulatory framework for stable coins, right? And let's strengthen the dollar that way. Let's have Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. Let's
Yep.
strengthen our balance sheet, not the Fed's balance sheet, the Treasury. Let's strengthen the Treasury that way with strategic Bitcoin reserve. You have this commitment to AI and quantum that's already, been started, but now
Yep.
let's build the infrastructure there. Let's extend the tax act, which includes opportunity zones. This is the bet, we're making, right? This is going to be, so we have these tariff-based kind of manufacturing commitments, and whether they're hyperbole or real or somewhere in between, and somewhere in between is what they are, right? In other words, you hear about 500 billion. Well, some of that was already committed, but now it's being
Yep.
as all just brand new. But the point is, it's still more,
Yep.
and it still
Than
means
before.
jobs,
Yeah.
and it still means productivity, and it still means reshoring. But now you have this existing law that could get extended that drives incentives. So in other words,
Yep.
that's the stick, right? I hit you over the head with a carrot or a stick and say, I'm going to tariff you to oblivion if you don't build
Yep.
here. So you come. But then I hit you over the head with the tax extension that says, by the way, the incentives
Yep.
to invest here mean you could take capital gains from anywhere else in the planet in any other asset class, invest them into our opportunity zones, and
Yep.
defer your tax for 7 more years. And oh, by the way, get a step up in basis 5 years from now of 10% on that original tax, or 15% in 7 years. And then in 10 years, whatever that money is compounded to is tax free on a capital gain standpoint. Now,
Yep.
that is a carrot with whipped cream and all kinds of yummy stuff on
Yep.
top, saying, not only am I threatening you if you don't invest here, but now I'm giving you the ultimate gift to deploy your money here and repatriate
Yep.
trillion dollars here. What does that do to, the middle of the country, the
Yep.
growth, and so I think this could play out very well, and I think there is a design to it. The question is who's trying to break legs and throw stones at the guys who are running fast because they
Yep.
can't win the race. And that's what you're seeing right now is
Yep.
people trying to break legs because they can't run faster.
Hey, Matthias here, and if you're enjoying this and want access to even more alpha, early stage deals and opportunities, and also behind the scenes insights on the markets, hit the link in the description and make sure you're subscribed. It's free and it puts you ahead of the curve. Let's get back to the show. What do you think of the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I mean, again, full disclosure, I mean, in 2011, when I first saw Bitcoin, I was like the idealist, right?
Yeah.
Um, I was earlier on in my journey, and I was also pragmatist enough to go, they're never going to let this happen. Like
Yeah.
I was like, I'm all in. Like this makes sense. This is a monetary system that is truly equitable, truly
Yeah.
permissionless, truly good for humanity. There is no way the banksters are going to let this happen. That was what my thought was in 2011. But
Yeah.
I started to, play with it, and like there was a thing that was, I forget what it was called, but there was a site out there, and I know it was 2011 only because I remember where in the office I was, and I only had that office for like a year and a half, and I was in downtown San Diego, so I know it was
Yeah.
somewhere in 2011 when I first discovered it. And it was essentially like Quora meets Reddit. Like you could build a
Mm-hmm.
profile. The minute you did it, they loaded you up with 30,000 bits, which for people that don't know what a bit is, you've probably heard of a Satoshi, right?
Yeah.
So a Bitcoin is there's only 21 million of those. There's 100 million Satoshis in every Bitcoin. So those
Yeah.
are the fragmented pieces of a Bitcoin. And then a bit is 1 million inside of every Bitcoin. So at the time you built this profile and named it whatever you named it, Chris and blah blah blah, and they deposited 30,000 bits, right?
Yeah.
Which
What year
was
was this?
this was 2011. They
Yeah.
gave you 30,000 bits, which
Yeah.
was a significant amount of Bitcoin. I mean,
Yeah.
30,000 bits today would be worth five figures, right? So
Yeah.
um so the point is, I got this profile, and then you started to answer questions, and the whole
Yeah.
game was they kind of airdropped you 30,000 bits, and then what
Mm.
you did was you tipped each other, right? So like I would put
Yeah.
a question out, hey, I'm raising money for my startup, and I don't know what to do, or where should I get a deck? And if you answered, and I liked your answer, I could give
Got it.
you
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
this. Similar to
Yep.
how, like, if you're on Nostr right now, you can
Yep.
zap people with Satoshis. Like, you could zap them, hey, good post. And so instead of liking them, you're actually paying them with Satoshis. It was
Yep.
that concept, but it was bits instead of Satoshis. So it was, 100x more
Yep.
value, right? But at the
Yep.
time, again, we're talking about Bitcoin was in the sub $100 range, right?
Like
I
a few
mean,
bucks. Yeah.
whatever the
Yeah.
heck it
Yeah. Oh
was,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So at some point, I did that playing around, and I had like 3 Bitcoin worth of stuff,
Yep.
and I have no idea where that laptop went. It's not it's one of those stories. It's in a landfill somewhere,
Yep.
begrudging. But when I saw it, I immediately resonated with it, as a concept and as a technology and as a monetary system.
Mm.
I just never thought they would let it last, and
Yeah.
obviously it
Yeah.
wasn't alone. Now it's obvious that it lasted and it withstood every storm it could. And so having a strategic, you got to have a strategic reserve of something. I mean, money has not been backed by anything but our defense budget
Yep.
for 50 years.
Yep.
And at some point you can't continue to have that defense budget when the interest cost of your debt is higher than the annual cost of your defense budget. Like, something has
Yep.
to, oh, and then
Yep.
you have entitlements like Medicare and Medicaid and 80 million people that, that bought into a system that needs to be there. And regardless of how many million of those people were over 150, which we found out, there's still 80 million that we know
Yep.
of. And then there's the Gen Xers and Ys that are still paying
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Still
that
paying and
below it, right?
yeah.
So, so at the end of the day, when you think about the entitlements, you think about that, you can't have money that's backed by nothing. You can't have the
Yeah.
global money last if it's all bet by is your ability to enforce your demands. And so, I mean, do I think it's a good idea? I think it's the idea. I mean, I think it's
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
because it's not big enough, and Bitcoin can't really function as the global reserve currency, despite
Yep.
anyone's idealistic wishes.
Yep.
Me being, you know, a lover of it, it's not going to function that way, and it shouldn't. It doesn't have to, right?
Yep.
Any more than gold functions that way. Now we could make the arguments around Bitcoin's way more easy to put around, way more divisible, way more like
Yep.
it's programmatic. I mean, it has a lot of features that gold never had and never will. But the point is that you're living in a pipe dream if you think somehow, and even Larry Fink saying this the other day, it's about pushing money into an ETF because he knows all the other asset classes are down, right? So,
Yep.
Larry Fink coming out and saying that Bitcoin's going to beat the US dollar to the hegemony is again,
Mm.
you gotta like think through that rationally and go, well, it's not that
Yep.
he doesn't know what he's talking about, but there's an agenda there.
Yep.
And a couple years ago, they were all saying it was rat poison.
Yep.
So the reality is it's a great idea. It is the idea, and it's the complement. And if we do it, when we do it, because we've said right now, essentially, we're not going to sell what we have. What we have not said, and what the Bitcoin Act is that we're going to buy a
Yep.
certain, and the minimum that we would buy is we would get ourselves to 1 million Bitcoin,
Yep.
and then up to 4 million Bitcoin, right? And so when you think about the last world order and what happened and how we took the pound's hegemony away from
Yep.
them, it was about a couple of different things. But one of the things was is we had more gold than everybody else. And then we mandated that
Yep.
when we were going to rebuild the rest of the planet after World War II, because the Europe was blown to
Yep.
bits, Japan, Asia was blown to bits, China didn't matter, right? It was a backwater town that the Japanese ruled
Yep.
over. So like when that was the world and the only place that had the infrastructure and the manufacturing capacity and whatever to go
Everything. Yeah.
buy
Yeah. Yeah.
build
Yeah.
everything also had all the
Yep.
gold, and we said we're going to make you pay us in gold
Yep.
and we'll rebuild your town. They didn't have a choice, and so
Yep.
we created this actual base of real capital
Yep.
underneath global money supply. And then when we put pegged oil to it, and oil got denominated, and then we started to make global debt and
Yep.
everything denominated in dollars, we created the source code that we live in today. So
Yep.
how do you extend that source code permanently? You put the ultimate hard asset
Yep.
with it. And what is the ultimate hard asset? Bitcoin.
Yep. BTC.
So there's nothing more strategic, in my opinion,
Yep.
than a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And when you think about innovation and all the lack of certainty that innovators have had, look, there's no world we live in. And again, back to Larry Fink, where he's right. He said, we're going to tokenize real world assets. We're going to do $1 billion worth of real world assets, or $1 trillion, whatever,
Yep.
in real world asset tokenization this year. Okay. Well, they're not going to only be the ones, right? That's not
Yep.
going to
Yep.
happen
Yep.
if they do it. So others are going to do it. Okay, well, where are those innovators happening? Are they in Dubai?
Yeah.
Are they in, like, where are they? Right?
Yeah.
Like, are they in, or are they here where you have a rule of law? You have you have this legacy, you have Silicon Valley, you have Texas, you have these hubs, right? And now you're going to create clarity around not only the on and off ramps and the banking, which have not
Yep.
existed because they were being squeezed by the Fed and also the last administration and choke point 2.0 and all that stuff. If you eradicate that, you create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, a capital base that is hard and immutable and underneath your currency base, which is the dominant source code of the world. And then you enable innovators to come here with certainty. And then
Yep.
you have opportunity zones that flood capital in to create jobs and manufacturing in those zones with a big incentive and cap gains tax free 10 years from now. How do you lose? You don't.
My no, no, I agree with you. I'm very curious to see what comes with that framework. So a few days ago they said they would come out with a framework in August. I'm very curious to see really on the ground, like what does it mean for companies who want to today looking to open offices, build projects. What does it actually mean on the ground for people who are debating? Do I do Europe? Do I do Singapore? Do I do the Middle East? Do I do the US? And what's the best product for the builder, right? It's going to be very interesting. I mean, what do you think actually? I know you're biased, but interesting to.
I mean, again, I've disclosed my bias, right?
Yeah,
So I'm open to debate. I'm open to be
yeah,
wrong. Here's what I think. Here's what I think is the hurdle, right? So I mean, everything I said is in motion.
yeah,
You
yeah,
couldn't, if you were ever going to have a leadership, both in Congress, the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, if you're going to
yeah,
ever have a leadership that could get you most of what we just said,
yeah.
it's right now.
Oh, I agree. I
So
agree. This this is the
why won't
time.
we
Oh
get the
yes. Yeah,
most? In
yeah,
other
yeah,
words, why
yeah,
won't we get the most? Because you can't prepare for getting the most. You certainly can't prepare for getting it all because no one
yeah,
ever gets it all. That's not how
yeah,
the politics works and not how the world works. So if you're not going to get it all, and you could get more than ever before, but you're not going to get the most
yeah,
because just that's not reality. What is in the way? What are the hurdles and what are the things and the trade-offs that are going to happen
yeah,
with every move that could be overplayed, right? So what my big concern about tariffs wasn't tariffs or the short-term effect or some of the things we're thinking now.
yeah,
My big concern about tariffs, and the one that I'm still concerned about, is that because of the backlash, and again, I do not know about this El Salvador thing enough to know what's real and what's not. What I know is
yeah,
when I listen to both sides, they both seem pretty convinced of their set of facts, and I can't make sense of which
yeah,
one even has facts. What I do know is that El Salvador's president was just in our White House and
yeah,
was aligned with ours. Now, again, I am not making any statement of opinion on this because I do not have any clarity into what the actual facts are to
yeah,
make it an informed one. So I am leaving that where it belongs, outside of my opinion, because I don't have one on what it is. But here's my opinion that does matter. Every time we have something like that happen and somebody wins, let's say that the current
yep,
administration wins, we are losing the ability to win something else that could be important.
yep,
Whether we want to win, we don't win at all, and so we lose whatever we lose. We lose mind share, we
yep,
lose we lose faith, we lose a little bit of trust, and it doesn't matter if we're right. Assume that it's right. Assume that
yep,
we're right. Even when we right, whenever you win a argument, you lose the relationship. You lose a
yep,
piece of the
yep, yeah,
relationship
yeah,
whenever you win an
yeah,
argument. And so if you win an argument over and over and over, and there's no one better at winning arguments than Trump because he'll just beat
yep,
you into oblivion.
yep,
Every time that happens, you lose a relationship or you lose
yep,
an element of that relationship that can't be repaired, even if it goes unsaid, even if the relationship stays intact. And so my concern is that these early wins,
mm, yep,
if they're not in the right priority, could cripple the ability to get what we need to have happen done, which is what I believe I just said. We need
yep,
to have the renewal of the TCJA. We need to have the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. We need to
yep,
have the Genius Act here. We need to have these things. And there's
yep,
bipartisan
yep,
support for most of them
yep,
right now.
yep,
But every time we trade one other thing, whether it's the tariff thing or we stay too long on this or
yep,
every time we trade one of those, we lose the ability to guarantee that we get one of the things that we currently have enough bipartisan support for. And if we don't get some of those aspects of the TCJA renewed,
Yep.
then we weaken our position to create not only a better economy for all, but an investable base that the rest of the world invests in, and that everyone gets back to some level of normal, but that the US economy is truly the golden age.
Yep.
I'm not worried that it's not going to happen yet, but I recognize the fact that we were playing in a thin area where we could go too
Yep.
far on something that quote unquote doesn't matter as much,
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
and we could get there. And again, this is not about whether I think money or economics matters more than social equity or inequality. It's not that. It's the recognition that nobody that I know of can go around doing whatever they're doing right now without some form of capital or money to do it.
Yep.
And whether we like it or not, the world runs on power and money,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it runs on energy.
Yep.
And that's how it's run and that's how it works. And so when that's broken, everything else becomes secondary, because when that part's broken, when that part's uncertain, nobody does anything. Capital doesn't invest. People don't do good things, right? Wars start. Bad
Yep.
shit happens when that part's broken. So to me, if you want good things to happen, then go do good things, but understand why the economy has to be working. And then again, embrace the ideas that could actually make it sustainable. Because to think that somehow what we currently have been doing for the last however many decades, and
Yep.
that last 4 years we put on steroids, that is not going to get anybody
Yep.
their equity, their equality, that's not going to get anybody any of those things, because you can't print your way into that scenario anymore.
Yep. Yep.
So it's all, kabuki theater.
Yep.
This is the only way you get to a scenario where it's somewhat sustainable and where productivity can return, and you have to deal with the 100-year debt crisis. And, if you haven't seen Dalio's video on how the economic machine works, it's a great
Yep.
video from years back that explains we are in that great deleveraging. Now, it can be
Yep.
beautiful or it can be ugly. I don't know if it's beautiful yet or not. What I know is that it was at least triggered on purpose so that there
Yep.
could be some controls around it versus having it happen by surprise. Wall
Yep.
Street always has it happen by surprise, and then they get bailed out.
Yep.
Trump, right or wrong, love him or hate him, Trump, Lutnick, and Bissent said
Yep.
we're gonna light the match first. We're gonna do a controlled demolition.
Yep. Yep.
And again, whether it's controlled or sustained or not is up for debate as we play this out. But they at
Yep.
least had a plan. We're gonna do a
Yep.
controlled demolition of this so that we can rebuild quicker.
Yep.
And again, that's the bet they made. Time will tell.
Yep. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. It's if you don't follow these practically now, like every single day, you miss out such a large piece of the puzzle because things move so fast now. So we have about 5, 10 minutes left. Let me hit you with the question that everyone wants me to ask on every show. We have, all these Telegram groups. They say, okay, what do you think of the cycle, bull, bear, future cycle? We're in this choppy range. What's your take on what's happening to crypto?
Oh, to crypto specifically. Yeah.
Crypto specifically, prices.
Well,
People love to hear about predictions.
sure. Again, take this for what it's worth. So, what's going to happen in crypto versus Bitcoin, and I'll speak to them together but
Yep.
separate, right? So when I think about crypto, I think about all things that are layer twos or that are other networks
Yep.
outside of Bitcoin.
Yep.
And that can include layer twos on top of Bitcoin, but I'm putting crypto in that. So as a market,
Yep.
um, you know, let's start with the good stuff. So the good stuff is you've got legislation, you got an SEC commissioner that just got put in that are tailwinds. So these are all
Yep.
good things, right? Um, you have both the Genius Act as well as the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, which will then validate other countries that are smaller, whether they be El Salvador, Argentina, Bhutan the other day said we're going to mine Bitcoin.
Yep.
UAE obviously has been leading in that way, trying to recruit, money and capital and talent and
Yep.
whatever for years. But you have all these other things. So those ships will rise with the tide of America embracing crypto.
Yep.
And so you could make an argument that we are coming into some level of winter to spring, and then maybe spring to summer as far as price action and valuations go.
Yep.
Um, okay, so if you're trading it, then I could say, yeah, we're probably going to see global money supplies improve, not because of good things, but because of these because people will only way out of this is to stimulate their own economy. They're going to have to debase
Yep.
their currency. And that means they're going to print. So even if we don't print, they're going to print. So global M2 shoots up. And if you look at the historical
Yep.
charts, every time that happens, the price of Bitcoin goes up. Every time the price of Bitcoin goes up, the price of alts go up. So in the short run, meaning next, 6, 12, 24 months, I think we could hit, a bull cycle in the price action of
Yep.
cryptos. Um, but I think that's also going to cause, more of the negatives, which mean more meme coins, more rug pulls, more scammers,
Yep.
because more people enter. So those are the negatives that come with that. So, beware. And the other negatives are um, you have a ton, it's a positive and a negative. You have a ton of people that have entered the space as builders, as developers, as coders. Now, those people have been in for quite a while,
Yep.
and this is not their first cycle. And so they're kind of used to winter. They know how to like survive it. They'll just keep building. And so every time we keep building is a good thing because when you're in a bull market, people don't build as much. They're just selling and shilling, right? But when
Yep.
they're not in a bull market, they're able to build if they were able to get enough capital under treasury to ride out the next winter and bear cycle. So we've had a lot of building going on, but we also have had a lot of overvalued networks that ultimately haven't
Yep.
been building or just don't have any continued traction. And
Yep.
so although they have a lot of holders, they don't have a lot of activity on the actual stuff.
Yep.
And so they will spike, but then they will also probably not last, meaning
Yep.
that it'll spike and they will go. So if I was investing and not speculating, and there's a difference, right?
Yep.
Speculating is letting the number go up and then I get out before number go down. That's not investing. That's speculating.
Yep.
And that's fine. There's people that make their living that way. I'm not here to judge it. I don't do that. I'm a builder. I'm an investor. I only go into the things that I can't see not working over time, 5, 10,
Yep.
15 years. So if I'm looking at investing, I think there's only a handful of networks worth investing in. And I think more of them are now moving to some level of the Bitcoin stack as a layer two
Yep.
or potentially. Now, you've seen Cardano make a statement that they are going to, through Bitcoin OS, bring DeFi, over to
Yep.
the Bitcoin network as a layer two. I think those kind of moves will probably maybe happen again. I think somebody else might say, I
Mm.
think another
Yep.
separate blockchain might also start to do that. It does not mean that there's not going to be a model for ETH or not. I'm not saying that. This is not a religious conversation. This is saying that there will be a migration to one or two
Yep.
operating systems for the crypto future as settlement layers.
Yep.
I still think ETH and Bitcoin are probably those two.
Yep.
What percentage? I'm not going to guess, not going to speculate. What I do know is that the fragmentation that sits on top of ETH right now has to consolidate. There is just
Yep.
no world where it doesn't over the next 10 years. So I'd be hesitant to bet long term on the majority of it because I just
Yep.
think it's not feasible. It's not likely. It's not historical. Um, when institutional money has blessed certain things, as they have recently, when governments make it law, as they have, you could argue stablecoins
Yep.
are probably going to be on top of ETH, or at least mostly right now.
Yep.
You could see stablecoins start to form on top of Bitcoin because of some of the new capabilities over there. So I think there'll be a blip. But again, what happens to a Ripple? What I don't know. What I know is
Yep.
there are certain things that are happening that will create contracts and forcing functions within the existing infrastructure that make things that maybe otherwise wouldn't be viable, right? It's like beta versus VHS. Beta was a better technology, but
Yep.
VHS because it got the distribution and got the contracts, right? So it's like
Yep.
you can argue good versus good enough, but at the end of the day, relationships matter, and it seems like there are some there. So that's my bet there. But I also think that we're going to see more headwinds. I don't know. I think I could see a world at the end of the year where Bitcoin's in the 200,000 range. I also could see a world where, and I'm kind of secretly, hoping because I don't own enough yet.
Yep.
Hoping that we stay in this kind of lumpy trading range sub 100
Shop.
for
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
longer, right? Just greedily. Like I kind of hope that, um, the global liquidity and some of the tariff stuff kind of, artificially
yeah,
depress. But that's my selfish hope. That's not necessarily my prediction. My prediction is
yeah,
that I think when it breaks hard into the up.
yep,
Um, and so not investment advice, but um, we don't look backwards. I mean, the probability of Bitcoin going to zero now is as close to zero as it's ever been.
yeah,
And if it doesn't go to zero, it's just a matter of time before it eats a big chunk
yeah,
of global capital.
yeah. I
And
agree.
so it really doesn't matter whether you get it at 79, 84, 94,
Yep,
right? It really doesn't matter if it doesn't go to
yep,
zero. It really doesn't matter. And so I think that's kind of how I think about the crypto stuff. And then as far as I like some of the things happening over at Stacks. I like some of the things happening. If Cardano is serious, I again, all the crypto
yep,
religious hate aside, like pragmatics, like
yep,
strategically, that is a smart move to say we have all this stuff that people call a
yep,
ghost city of, you know, ADA developer, like ADA people, but no one else cares and it's not ETH and whatever. But we have UTXO MA and we have UTXO and the biggest Bitcoin, settlement layer on the planet. And we're going to bring our DeFi capabilities on top of a place where it doesn't exist. I
yep.
think it's a very strategic move, and I think that will have implications that could be net positive to all involved.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah,
Again,
yeah,
I'm not pumping anything here. I'm just saying, think about it. Like if Square is the only one that everyone in the world will take, which is Bitcoin, whether they're a
yep,
country, and corporates are buying it now in their treasury at record rates. Forget the leverage plays. I actually don't think the leverage plays are good. I actually think that could blow up.
yep,
Which will just temporarily depress price and shock the market and have a negative impact, but it won't permanently damage. It'll create problems for a 2 year period or whatever, and we could have a pullback that's pretty dramatic if that blew up. But I think at the end of the day, it's a signal, and what's not going to happen is this base layer is not going away.
yep,
The need for it's not going away. It's only getting bigger, and a strategic Bitcoin reserve at a major G7, including be us being first,
yep,
all but guarantees that the risk is out of the price
yep,
forever.
yep, yep. No, I
So
agree.
it's time to build, though. It's time to. What I would do is I'd find where is the cash flow that I'm going to use to buy it, so I don't have to go do it with leverage and do it on margin where I could get wiped out. That's
Yep,
advice for crypto investors: is where can I find value in a stagflation market
yep,
where prices are depressed but cash flows are real? Where can
yep,
I find cash flows, and then where could I take those cash flows in dollars, U.S.
yep,
dollars cash flows, and start to take some base of that 50%, whatever, and invest in my own treasury, holding that long-term cash that I don't need
yep,
tomorrow in Bitcoin and letting it ride. And
yep,
then as the market improves on crypto, what are the projects or things where I could build on Bitcoin or use some of my, to do that? I could always borrow against my asset. I don't even have to use my
yep,
Bitcoin. I can borrow
yep,
dollars
yep,
out and invest in the projects and double down. But at a minimum, like my advice and my strategy is I'm going to go buy cash flows with hard assets or businesses, right?
yep,
And use a good percentage of those cash flows to start to build a capital base without leverage. Because then if the market drops, you're not exposed on the leverage side. You don't get wiped out
yep,
or margin called. But at the same time, as it recovers, you're just dollar cost averaging into every dip.
yep,
And as it recovers, your capital base is generational. And meanwhile, when it's down, you still have cash flows in dollars, which is the source code for the global economy. So you can still pay everybody's bills and you can still get rich that way.
yep, yep. Chris, we have to wrap it up. I'm curious to I want people to because you cover all this, we could talk for hours. You cover so many different topics. I want people to be able to find you. What's if you had to summarize how can people find you and also like a closing kind of statement of, what you're excited for and what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we I think we are living into the opportunity age.
Yep.
Um, and what I mean by that specifically is I think there are a tremendous amount of opportunities for people that want to build that are going to take a longer term horizon
Yep.
versus a quarterly return horizon and that are willing to roll up their sleeves. I think there is more opportunity today than any other time in history.
Yep.
You have the convergence of digital economy with an analog economy. You have things at scale now with Bitcoin, with other networks that are enabling and unlocking the tokenization of everything, bits and atoms, right?
Yep.
And at the same time, you have AI rapidly creating the ability to produce things at a fraction of the cost as before. You have youth at a global
Yep.
level, right? You have 2 billion people in Africa under the age of 20 something. You have, 70 or 80 million Gen XYZs here, right? Gen
Yep.
YZs here. Um, and you have a bunch of businesses that boomers are retiring from that
Yep.
are healthy and have been around that are human and not have anything to do with tech, but where people actually want to consume them. And then you have this dark morass of we've all been overly messaged to and stimulated by and put into a sympathetic response and with corporate megaliths that don't care a bit about us.
Yep.
And so I think you have all these different forces that are converging. And I think you have a need where people need to find new paths to income, new paths to
Yep.
wealth creation, new paths to sustainable portfolio growth. And you have this massive redistribution of wealth to those who get it and those who don't. And
Yep.
so I couldn't think of a better time, although it won't be easy to be in the game, looking for opportunity.
Yep.
You also have more noise than ever. So finding the signal through that is the challenge. Um, and so where's the best place to connect, to stay in the conversation with me, see what we're doing. The most active I am is on Substack. So if you go to
Yep.
wealthmatterstome.com, you get
We'll
to
link it in the description and
yeah,
everything.
you
Yep.
get to read
Yep.
my most recent thought. That's where I publish all my stuff. I'm not social on all the other stuff for a lot of other
Yep.
reasons. I am on X more as a listener, and so I can do spaces. But at the end of the day,
Yep.
that's where we just hit. I think we're going to hit 10,000 by the time this drops. We're like 8 or 9 folks away from 10,000 subscribers on
Nice.
there. I had a huge pump this month, so I'm very grateful for that. And so I'm pouring more and more of my conversations, my ideas, my insights into that, and looking for debate, looking for conversation. So please
Yep.
interact there, and then everything else from there is easy. At Atomic, we're closing 2 funds since we last talked.
Yep.
We
Nice.
kind of we re-engaged our focus on the SMB side of what we're doing, specifically into qualified opportunity zone investments again, because we have a couple acquisitions that fit that model where we can launch, we
Yep.
can put them into QOZBs and benefit for both us and the investors, from the tax incentives there. But I'm also making a bet that there's a high probability that when this tax act gets renewed, the existing benefits from 2017 and 19 get
Yep.
extended. And if they get extended, I think
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
billions and trillions of dollars, and so we'll be in front of it. And so that's kind of what we're focused on now. And then the RIA strategy that we talked about before is still
Yep.
in parallel to that. But anyway, so that's
Nice.
about. I appreciate your time and always love being on your show. You do a phenomenal job. I follow you on Twitter.
Thank you.
I love your commentary, and I thank you for being another voice out there in the market that's
Yeah.
bringing folks.
It's a lot of no, thank you, appreciate it. So we'll link everything, Substack and everything, socials around the video here. Uh, we should definitely have you back on after the summer, so we'll have some, at least we can reflect on what we talked about today, see what the US is doing. I'm personally very curious to see how the new framework from a regulatory perspective affects everything. I think it's gonna be very bullish for the space. I think people are too focused on price going up today and tomorrow. I'm much more of a long-term thinker, so it's we're very aligned on that. I think the space is only going one way, and that's up. And it might take longer than many people expect. We might not see a bull run next week, and that's fine. But overall, I think we're in a good place. Thank you for being on the show. We'll have you
The
back.
The last comment I want to say on that, because I think
Yep.
it's really important, and I just want to say yes to everything you just said from a mindset, because
Yep.
especially if a listener on this is got at least 15 to 20 more years in their economic game, meaning they're not
Yeah.
retiring tomorrow, right? Aggregate number, right, have been created in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you understand history, you understand that the current monetary system, the current source code of the world, the Federal Reserve, and the IMF and all the World Bank, because all that spun out of the
Yeah.
Federal Reserve, like creating, was literally 95 years old
Yeah.
when we saw this hockey stick of wealth creation on top of it in the last 15 years. It was
Yeah.
started in 1913. So if you think about Bitcoin and the crypto ecosystem being 16 years old, and you're worried about whether or not you have enough money or you're going to have enough time to get rich at whatever you think that means, you have 80 years from now before
Yeah.
you can even start. Your grandkids' kids will be monetizing this at a level you could never dream of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
80 years from now because it'll be at that level of maturity. You are happy to see it in the 16th year. So again, a longer term and a patient and a historical lens helps us calm down so we can just focus on what matters and speed
Yeah.
up our actions in those steps. So I think it was a really important point. People have to take
Yeah.
a different view of this and stop
I agree.
chasing, you know.
The quick pumps. No, I agree with you. Yeah, nothing more to add. Please follow Chris. A lot of very, always very sharp, ideas. Thank you for being on the show, Chris, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for being.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you got value from this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. So subscribe now. We drop new episodes and videos several times a week featuring power players, market movers, and insiders from the financial world. And if you want access to deals and insights we only share privately, hit the links in the description and we'll see you on the next show.